Now I'm going to install my flush pull, and it's going to just mount right there and be right against the surface, and boy, that's going to look really cool. Since these are closet doors that these flush pulls are going on, and since the pulls are pretty expensive, about $300 each, so the 2 for 1 door would be $600, the client and I decided to just use them on the outside and use a basic knob on the inside. Now, when I made the order, I ran into an issue. These doors were 1 3/8 thick, and the pulls were meant for the more standard 1 3/4 doors, like in commercial applications. When the rep saw this, he said that it would be impossible because the pull and the latch would interfere with each other. The latch was 7/8 wide, and the flush pull recessed into the door 3/8, so on a 1 3/8 thick door, there would be an overlap of 1/8 of an inch between the two. This is represented in the diagram by the area filled in red. I'm often told on jobs that something's impossible, and these are the kind of challenges I particularly enjoy, so I set about seeing if there was a way I could make this work. I measured the Baldwin latch myself. We had selected a Baldwin latch knob, and I found it was actually only 3/4 of an inch wide. Yet this still meant that there would be an 1/16 overlap between it and the flush pull, so I figured that I could simply move the latch over 1/16. Then I had to check that the latch faceplate, which is 1 inch wide, would still have enough room on the edge of the door. It did, with 1/8 of an inch to spare. I had to personally guarantee this to the supplier, that I could make this work, and several emails were exchanged to this effect. They sent the flush pull, which was also custom made with a long spindle that the knob on the other side was to mount to. Not too complicated in the end, but initially it really did seem like it wasn't going to work. And it was ironic that we had first chosen to use the flush pull on only one side to save money, but then discovered that, because of the clearance issues, using the pulls on both sides of a 1 3/8 thick door wouldn't have worked anyway. So to lay out my 2 different preps on each side of the door, I'm going to use my boring jig, and that'll also bore this 1 inch hole for the latch. But like I said, I want to move this over just a little past 1/16 of an inch, so it's off center. So I've got my boring jig set up here, and this is an adapter for it, so I can have a 1/4 inch drill bit that will find the center of that bore on each side. It's a real nice feature. And when I clamp this on, I'm just going to basically just barely touch the door with this drill bit on each side, just to make a mark, and then I can find that center point and use my different drill bits to do the drill for the different preps. But as we see, this is a self-centering jig, so that the gears work so that it centers itself when you tighten it up. So, but I want to be off. I want to be over this way a little bit. So I'm going to loosen it up and just slip a shim on this side to move it over 1/16 of an inch. And I've got this 16-inch stock, and I'm going to actually use 2 of these. These are cardboard strips, and they're going to compress down a little bit. And I figured with a couple of these and snugging it up real tight, I would be really close to my offset. I got to be really careful here. So I have this line. That line's the center line. That pencil line's the center line of the latch. So I want this drill bit to be hitting that. Okay. Now that's essentially moved my bore over about 1/16 of an inch. And if I look in here, it's hard to see, but if I'm looking in here and looking at this drill bit, it's touching that pencil line, so I know I'm centered. And then I can snug it up, and I'm ready to drill that 1 inch hole and then make those marks with these cross bores. I'm just going to very gently run this bit in and just touch the surface of that inside. I'll be able to find that pretty easily. And then same on the outside. and then I can drill my 1-inch bore here. I'm just going to use my cordless here. Okay. Now you can see this this bore is offset 1/16 from the center line, and then I got my mark on the outside here that I can use to set my jig there, and I got my very small mark here I can use to drill my cross bore there. Something to see with these Trimco flush poles is when you order them, you have to specify what your spindle is. You have to specify it to match the latch that you're using, because these are made to order. So let's say you're using this as a Baldwin latch, and this spindle is on the diamond, and it's a 7.2 millimeter spindle. So you'd have to tell that to Trimco, and then they would manufacture this on the diamond with a 7.2 millimeter width, and then that fits, and that's right like that. If you were to be like that, that would be called on the square. And they also come with a split hub so that either side can move freely. And with these flush poles, the reason they do that is if you were to put your fingers in the bail, we call this curved type of handle a bail, and turn it, and if somebody else was grabbing from the other side, if you had another flush pole and they had their fingers in it and one person turns it, you could get your fingers caught and break them, break them, so they say. Now I'm going to make my mortise for this outside trim. This part here is 2.5 inches wide, and they recommend making a 2 5/8 mortise for it, just so you're not too tight. And I have a router that has a 1/2 inch router bit with a 5/8 collar, so I make my template 1/8 over my finished mortise. So this is a 2 3/4 hole, and I'm going to use that to cut that mortise. And I basically just got a 2 3/4 inch hole saw bit, and I cut out a piece of MDF. So I'm just going to go ahead and finish this off. Let's be careful. And I want to be able to see that my jig's lined up with that hole. That's why I kind of cut that a little bit. And now I've got my, just going to clamp this guy on. And now I can just take my router and I'll be able to set this to that depth and route about a 7/16 deep mortise in there. And you can see the kind of interesting prep I have here. On this side I got this big 2 5/8 mortise, and then on this side I just have a 5/8 hole, which is all I need for that spindle on that side, and then just a 1-inch bore for the latch. So now I've got plenty of room for my pole here. There. So it fits nicely. And I just want to make sure I'm square. Okay. So I need to have that outside trim mounted so I can have this spindle in place, because the inside gets a piece of hardware that it needs to be, it needs that little piece to kind of be located correctly. I needed the spindle to locate this mount, but to mount this rose, I actually have to have that spindle out of my way. So I basically have a little nut that sleeves onto that plate. Okay, my spindle's back, my exterior trim is back on, and the spindle's there, and now I'm just going to put my lever on, and I got a little set screw to tighten up, and that should be it. I did make one change that I wanted to show, which is on our inside trims. I changed to a knob and a knob latch. These knob latches, this is the latch part, they twist both ways, and they're a lot gentler, a lot less springy than the lever latches. The lever latches have to be stiffer to make that lever spring back up. And the reason for this is it's nice to have it be a little more gentler. It's easier on the fingers, and also you can turn it either way, whereas the lever latch, you would only turn it one way. If we walk around the corner here, we can see the hallway, and I just wanted to show, this is a really skinny hallway. It's only 2 feet 10 inches wide, which is not that uncommon for a 1950s house, but it really makes a big difference when we have these flush pulls that don't go out into the space anymore, as well as looking extremely unique. And that's going to make a big difference in this tight area, as well as this one down here. Well, thanks for watching. This was a really fun project, and I had a lot of fun showing it to you.